They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today, we're just biding our time until games start back up again because it's the All-Star break. We have a couple of days off games. So I wanted to kind of jump ahead a little bit. We've got a couple of weeks left until the NBA trade deadline. It is March 25th is the official NBA trade deadline. Today, as I'm recording this, it's the 8th. So a couple weeks left, but we're starting to hear the rumors sort of ramp up and, teams leaking out things that they might be interested in doing. And I wanted to talk about the Boston Celtics because this is a team that is definitely going to be very active on the trade market. We know that they have that huge trade exception that they obtained from the Gordon Hayward sign-in trade that they were able to execute in the offseason. I had talked about that when that happened, being able to turn the Gordon Hayward to Charlotte thing into a sign-in trade, which creates a big trade exception for the Celtics worth about $28.5 million, I believe. So that's a huge piece for them to be able to acquire somebody. They can acquire somebody making that much money or less. I believe in order to avoid the luxury tax, they have to send out some salary back. So there might be something there. But I just wanted to talk about maybe a couple targets for them and what the Celtics could potentially end up, wanting to do on this trade market. So we know that Boston is interested in a couple of guys that we've heard specifically. You're going to hear a lot of names out there, and we're going to hear a lot more as the weeks go along. I think the Celtics are going to be, rumored for pretty much every relevant player who might be available on the market. We've heard specifically a couple of guys from the Kings, both Harrison Barnes and Buddy Hield have been, linked to them in a couple of rumors. We've heard Nikola Vucevic, which would obviously he'd be a little bit harder to trade for. There's been a lot of guys out there. I know that Andre Drummond was rumored, even though he cannot fit into that trade exception. That's just some people kind of throwing that out there. So he does not fit. But there's plenty of guys out there that the Celtics might take a look at acquiring, take a look at bringing onto the team here. And that would be big for them for a couple of reasons, right? They can use this trade exception in order to kind of recoup some of the value that they lost when Gordon Hayward left, because this is a team that has lost multiple free agents in the past couple of years. Kyrie Irving, Al Horford, and now Hayward. They were able to do a pretty good job of replacing Kyrie, bringing in Kemba Walker, who is another all-star level guard. Al Horford, it was a little bit surprising that he left, but he's a guy who's sort of past his prime anyway, and they were ready for a couple of other guys to kind of step up and take over some of the production there. So losing Hayward is a bigger blow, just because he was, when they signed him, he was coming off an all-star caliber season, and they were expecting him to slide right in there next to Isaiah Thomas, who was eventually traded for Kyrie Irving. And it just was unfortunate because Hayward ended up getting hurt the first game of the year and it never really worked out, but he's still a very good player, obviously, and he's played at an all-star level this year with the Charlotte Hornets. Now that he's been, multiple years removed from that injury that he had. And even though he has never been, amazing for the Celtics, certainly that was not a guy that they would have liked to lose for nothing. So they can get something back for him now by, being able to acquire a player that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. Now, obviously, they'll have to give up something additional, whether that be, a couple of their young players or draft assets or whatever that is. They have a couple of younger guys on this roster, potentially Grant Williams, Aaron Nesmith, Carson Edwards. There's a couple of guys that you could talk about that would be probably available for trade. Obviously, nothing is going to have to do with Jaylen Brown or Jayson Tatum. Those guys are probably off the board. Not probably, they are off the board. I would consider both of those players probably to be untouchable at this point. But maybe there's a Kemba Walker deal, although that probably wouldn't involve the exception. And we've heard plenty of names. And so the Celtics, I think, can definitely be a huge player in this trade market if they decide to make a deal. Because teams can just take a look at some of the players that they want to get rid of and just call Boston pretty much every time, right? If the Kings want to get rid of Buddy Hield or Harrison Barnes, just call up Danny Ainge and see what you want for him, right? We've heard Otto Porter from the Bulls could potentially get traded, even though that's not necessarily a guy that the Celtics might look to, considering he's making a ton of money and is expiring. But maybe the Bulls want to call up Celtics and say, hey, what do you give us back for him? Can we just kind of dump this guy on you? JJ Redick has been a guy out there. Maybe the Pelicans want to take a look at moving him somewhere. Definitely the Celtics would be a destination, considering he can just slide right into that trade exception, don't have to give any salary back. Pelicans can just take a draft pick or whatever. So that's part of the reason why this is such a big deal, is because they can just take the salary and don't have to send salary back out. Now, if they want to duck the luxury tax, they would probably want to throw in like Tristan Thompson or, a couple of the other guys who are making a decent amount of money on this roster. Probably not Marcus Smart, considering how important he is to them, and he is still injured. But there's a couple of guys that they could throw in maybe to duck the money. But if it's, a guy in JJ Redick's salary range, the like $10 to $20 million, they can just take back somebody and not have to send any salary back out, and just kind of say, okay, we'll take this money off your hands and give you a draft pick. If it's a contract the other team doesn't want, then that's potentially just a bit of leverage by saying, hey, you guys don't have to pay for this player anymore. We'll take it and pay for him. So that's a big bargaining chip, I think, for a lot of teams out there who are looking to dump some salary. Even if it's like quote unquote a bad contract, it can still belong to a good player, and so Boston will say, okay, like even though this is probably a little more than we want to be paying this guy, we can still take him in because we're trying to compete and try to win this year. And this is, what we feel like is the best option for our team, even if it's not necessarily the best allocation of resources. They can just take somebody back, and if they think they can help them, doesn't really matter how much they're being paid, because anybody under $28 million is eligible to be a member of this Celtics team, and so that leaves a lot of guys around the league that could potentially be trade targets for them. And the Celtics need this because they have been underwhelming. I mean, like as I'm talking right now, they're the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, but they're just a half game out of 5th and 1 game out of 6th. It's very, very tight. We've talked about this before. Between like 4 all the way down to like the 10 seed in the East, it's like razor thin, like 2 games separating all these teams. So Boston is 4, but they're 1 losing streak away from tumbling all the way down. So there's not very much room for error here. They're clearly outside of that group of the 3 best teams in the conference. It's the Sixers, Nets, and Bucks. The Celtics are kind of a step down from that, whereas a lot of people, I think myself included, were assuming that they would kind of be more in that upper tier. So they've struggled at points during this season. They've kind of turned a corner recently, been winning a couple more games here and there, but I think this team does need a jolt. It's kind of a situation where they've been running with a similar core for the past couple of seasons here. I know that they've swapped out Kemba for Kyrie, and there's been some pretty substantial changes, but it does feel like this version of the Celtics team has kind of failed to get over the hump for the past couple of years. And, somebody like JJ Redick or Buddy Hield is not necessarily going to hugely move the needle in that way, but I think just maybe making a change up here and injecting something new into this roster can probably go a long way for them, considering just how many times they've kind of tried to, try to win with a very similar roster, and it just hasn't really worked to this point. We know Danny Ainge has been at points kind of a little hesitant to pull the trigger on big deals. He did it with Kyrie Irving, and there's been plenty of other times where the Celtics have been very close to trading for a star and they just haven't done it. So maybe that's this time, right? If they can put together a package for Vucevic or any other star that becomes available, Vucevic is the guy that's rumored and he's one that comes to mind, but I'm sure there's a couple of other guys out there that might be able to be traded for into this exception. So I'm sure that they'll be out there. They'll be sniffing around looking for possible things they could do. They have this big trade exception, and they have they're not scared to deal Kemba Walker either. We've heard his name rumored multiple times, pretty much ever since they've signed him. He was instantly in trade rumors. So we'll just have to see how this goes for Boston, but they're certainly going to be a huge player on the trade market. I would expect them to make a deal, if not multiple deals. I think they'll do at least one thing. I don't think this is the roster that the Celtics are going to have a couple of weeks from now when the deadline passes. So they could definitely be one of the more interesting teams on the trade market. I talked a couple of weeks ago about how the Houston Rockets can swing the NBA trade market. I think the Celtics can do a very, very similar thing, potentially swinging the market on their own, just because it's kind of an interesting year where there's a ton of teams that are looking to get better and not a lot of teams that are looking to offload talent. So we'll just have to see how the Celtics play this out, and they could potentially be huge players here around the deadline, which is coming up pretty soon. And yeah, I think that's about all I have on the Boston Celtics. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Celtics, what moves they could potentially make, leading up to the trade deadline here. Would love to know your thoughts down below. But with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.